Hello everyone, I'm Nick, and in this video we're going to talk about how we can create resources in our REST API. So up until now we have this in-memory list of items, which is only being initialized once with a controller, and then we just populate it with some posts here. But what I want to do is I want to make this a little bit more complicated and add a creation method in this endpoint. Now, something very important that you have to know is that create is not as simple as get. So it's not just a simple read. There's more going on. And I'm not talking about the database side of things, because now we're just going to store this in memory. I'm talking about some guidelines and some architecture choices that you have to do, or actually to follow. Creating the endpoint is simple enough. We can simply do HTTP post, and then we're going to make an API post create endpoint, and this will have the exact same path as the get all, and that's because this is just how the standard is. When you create something against a specific collection of resources, that's how you name your endpoints. And then we're gonna make a public action result create method. And what we create is implied. You don't need to specify it. It's because in the roots it's coming down from the class, that's the nested class, and the controller is coming down from the posts controller name. So all we need to do is read a post and then save it. What I'm going to do now is not how you are meant to configure what you're reading from the body. You're not meant to use the domain object to read the contract, but we're going to talk about contracts later and how we're going to map these to domain objects. So for now I'm going to use the domain object, but keep in mind this is not how you're supposed to do. You're supposed to have two objects, a contract, which is the request that's coming in, and then map this request to the domain objects. For now I'm going to use the domain object to show you how we can create it, and then I'm going to refactor this. So .NET Core MVC, just .NET Core, has this attribute called from body, and this basically tells the API to say, hey, there's a post request coming and there's a body in this request. Can you map this to some object because I want to use it? And we're gonna say, yeah, sure, let's map this to the post. So we're gonna get our post coming from our user, and we're gonna save it in the database. In this case, it's just an in-memory. And what we're gonna return for now is just created. And we're gonna talk about why this is complaining actually. So all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add my posts thing here, and I'm gonna check if post ID is null or empty. So if string is null or empty, then post.id equals GUID. So essentially I'm giving it a new ID just so it's never without an ID. But the user can specify it in this case as well. Normally you would not do that. I just want to show you how the technical side of things work, and then we're going to translate this to a proper REST solution. So post.add our post item, and then you can see that the created method is complaining, and that's because we can't just say, hey, 201, we created this. We have to also provide the location header, and the location header is a header that specifies where the resource you just created is located. So this would be the endpoint to get this value. In our case then, we need to make another one of these and just say get, and / we're gonna add the post ID token here, which is the ID that we're gonna be retrieving for. So we'll simply do, and that's a hack, we're gonna refactor it later, var base equals, actually base is the keyword, So base URL equals dot request. And then what we need is two parts of this. First, it's the scheme. And then we're gonna string concatenate because we also want the host. So we're gonna say http context.request.host to URI component. And this will give us the base, the absolute URI really. And on top of that, we're gonna add our own endpoint, which in this case is the get. So we're gonna say location URI equals the base one plus, we're gonna refactor this later, get.replace. We're gonna manually replace for now the post ID with the post.id. And this is our location URI. So this goes here, and then it also asks for a value. So this is the content of what we created it. In this case, it's the post. So let's see how this works. If I run this, as you can see here, the new endpoint appears. It's a post create. It explains to you what you need to have in the body. But because I added this code that allows for empty IDs, just for now, for testing, I can do this. And then I get a 201 with my object in the response body and also the location of this item. Now, this is how you should properly create with post in REST. You don't necessarily have to have the response body of the object you created, even though it's nice to do so and it's recommended, but you definitely need the location to specify how the user can retrieve this. So let's close this and now let's refactor this a little bit. I will leave this part out of refactoring for now, but what I will refactor is how we're accepting something from the client. See, in the contracts folder, I have the v1, and in here, I create a folder called requests. And this folder will contain all our contracts for the v1 API regarding requests and request bodies. So I can make a create post request class. And this class will only have an ID. And I will replace this with create post request. And then I will create my post object in my domain and I can do anything I want with it. So in our case, it's just a new post and I'm gonna get the ID from the post. ID equals post request dot ID. So essentially I'm mapping the request to my domain object. In this case, they're similar, but sometimes they won't be similar. Most of the times they won't be similar. And the reason why we do this is because the contract we expose is versioned and different for what we're going to use in memory and potentially manipulate. And that's because, again, it's all about versioning, backwards compatibility. You should not mix up your contracts with your domain objects in memory application objects, call them whatever you want. They should be completely separate, and that's very important. This is, of course, not a limitation to the request itself, but also the response should be versioned because somebody consumes this. For that reason, we won't return the domain object post anymore, but we're going to make another object. And this will be in the response folder. So we're going to make a responses responses folder, and we're gonna create something called a post response. This is again versioned and it is a contract. Cannot change like that. You have to notify or you have to version. In this case, it will look exactly the same again. And here's where we're gonna map it to a response object. So we're gonna do new post response, and it's gonna get its ID from the post. And that's what we will return in our API. For now, they look the same, but it's very important that what comes in is not what we have in memory, because we might want to change this and we don't want to change backwards compatibility. And also we don't want to affect the contract anyway. I can add something and it doesn't break anyone. And again, when I return, I also don't have the same problem because the consumer always gets the same object, which is versioned. This is very, very important. Now, this does not look beautiful, and you can imagine that doing this over and over again can be very lengthy. That's why in the next video, we're going to talk about how we can map from one object to the other using automap. So stay tuned for this. That was all for today's video. If you liked it, subscribe and leave a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next one. Keep coding.